Let's see, that's not slide 86, John. I think that's about slide 87, maybe. There we go. Symbiotic relationships. When you hear that phrase, symbiotic relationship, what is symbiotic? What does symbiotic mean?
Two organisms benefiting from each other.
That's exactly right. And the reason we're going to even look at this is because it demonstrates once again just the fact that God had to be involved in the creation. He had to do the creation. This was not by chance, as evolutionists and non-believers would say. It is indeed two organisms. And a classic example of that would be the bees. And we'll look at the termites in just a moment. But when you think of honeybees, and we talked about them a little bit last week, the honeybee and the flower are dependent upon each other. The honeybee is dependent upon the flower to get its food. The flower is dependent upon the honeybee because without the honeybee pollinating the flowers, they could not reproduce. And yet the question that arises here is, how is this arrangement made? You and I know how it's made, but the evolutionist, classical evolutionary explanation is that originally the organisms involved didn't need each other. But as time passed, they got to where they became dependent upon each other because they were more closely associated, so that occasionally they assisted one another, and then they got lazy, so to speak, and their food source disappeared, and so now they begin to depend upon each other. That's the way evolutionists explain it. But let's look at some of the symbiotic relationships. First off, the termite. We're all familiar with termites, especially here in Oklahoma. If you don't spray your house for termites, you're going to have termites eventually. But did you know termites, even though they eat wood, they can't digest it? They eat it, they destroy your houses, but they cannot digest it. God has created a very excellent symbiotic relationship here, if you will. There's a small animal or organism called a foraminifera that lives in the intestine of the termite. And it is actually what digests the wood. And what it excretes, that's what the termite lives upon. And so the termite can't live without this little animal, and this animal can't live without the termite. A symbiotic relationship. And yet, trying to come up with an explanation of how the termite and the foraminifera got together has put some evolutionists through mental gymnastics. They can't explain it. The usual explanation, though, is that termites used to be able to digest wood, but when the foraminifera invaded the termite's body and started doing it for the termite, it did the digesting better. So the relationship became permanent then. This is how evolutionists explain it. Yes, Cal?
How did they get in there?
God.
Well, yeah, I know, but from the scientist standpoint, how in the world did they ever get in there in the first place? In the termite?
I don't know.
They smelled wood, so they went in there.
Could be. I don't know. I'm just saying that, you know, when God created these things, He had a specific plan, and the plan was designed in such a way that it cannot be explained by evolutionists, and therefore when we can use these type of examples, it confuses the evolutionists because they don't have an answer for it. Another good example of that is the cleaning shrimp. I know when you look at sea creatures and everything that there are some things that are pretty unique about the oceans and everything, but this cleaning shrimp, or the cleaner shrimp, is about 1 to 3 inches long. It's a clear shrimp. It's not like any shrimp that we would eat. It's transparent. It's very long, has very long antenna. And the fish will deliberately swim up beside the cleaning shrimp. And when it swims up beside the cleaning shrimp, the cleaning shrimp immediately begin picking off all the parasites off of the fish. And if the fish has a infected spot or an injured spot, that cleaning shrimp will clean that as well. And they'll keep cleaning around the fish until they get to the front. The fish raises its gills, opens its mouth wide, and the cleaning shrimp goes inside the fish and cleans out all the parasites inside the fish as well. Symbiotic relationship. The cleaning shrimp gets its food. The fish gets all the embedded parasites removed from it. And without the cleaning shrimp, this fish may eventually die. The advantage, obviously, is obvious. But how did such relationship come to be? Well, first off, the cleaning shrimp will do this for all kinds of fish, even the barracuda. Now, if you know anything about fish, barracuda is one of the more aggressive ones. Dan could probably tell you more about a barracuda. I've never caught one. I think you have, haven't you, Dan? No? They're pretty mean fish. But anyway, even the barracuda will allow the cleaning shrimp to do this. And they apparently taste okay because when they go to places where when you introduce the cleaning shrimp to places where they do not exist, the fish there will consume them. But in those places where the cleaning shrimp exists, the fish know their benefits, and so there's this symbiotic relationship. And no evolutionist would suggest that fish communicate the value of the shrimp to their young. They could find fish or find food elsewhere with little effort, but the fish would suffer if that were the case. And so, again, this is a classic example where God, in His infinite wisdom, took two living things and made them symbiotic, made them work together. One other one we'll look at is the Toad and the Tarantula. Now, this was actually published in 1980, March of 1980, in the Natural History magazine. And it's a beautiful article on this narrow-mouthed frog or toad, okay? The toad lives in the same burrow, the same hole where the tarantula lives. And yet, the tarantula does not attack the toad does not attack the tarantula. It does not eat the baby tarantulas when these baby tarantulas are born. But what it does do is the enemy of the tarantula, the baby tarantulas and the eggs, is the fire ant. And this narrow-mouthed toad loves the fire ants. So it eats all the fire ants and protects the tarantula from the danger here of destroying the babies and the eggs. So where's the symbiotic relationship? Well, snakes love the toad. So what happens? The toad gets underneath the tarantula when snakes come around, and snakes won't bother the toad then because they will not bother a tarantula. And in fact, the tarantula actually fends off the snake. So by preserving and protecting the toad, the tarantula assures the survival of her eggs and her young, and yet trying to explain this relationship by chance, it seems to the author, requires much more faith than accepting God's design of this relationship. Well, there's one last one that we'll look at, and that's the fungus and the ants. And this relationship is actually detailed in an article in Organic Gardening. This was in July of 1982. And two researchers from the University of Iowa were doing studies on leaf-cutting ants in Costa Rica. And the fungus, which is found only in the nest of the ants, is the exclusive food of the larvae of the ants. The enzymes the fungus produces are essential to the ant's ability to digest sap from the leaves that they eat. And the fungus produces no sexual spores, but relies entirely on the ants to propagate it. The ants and the fungus are totally dependent upon each other for life. And it would be a challenge to explain how a symbiotic system like this could arise by chance. But the real quirk is that the ants seem to know about the system. When a leaf was dipped in a substance fatal to the fungus, but which had no effect on the ants carefully groomed themselves, removing every trace of the substance from themselves before getting anywhere near the fungus. Now that could not have happened by chance. God was involved. They have a built-in realization that they must protect the fungus from the substance that would harm it, or their own survival would be threatened. No one would attribute this protective attitude to the mind of the ant, but to believe that some evolutionary acquired knowledge or instinct could do it also stretches the credibility of the situation. And if we believe that God designs living things with purpose and intelligence, such a system is easy for us to comprehend then, isn't it? Because we understand God's design. Attributing it to chance and mechanical opportunistic evolution leaves the issue in the realm of faith, and in the view of these observers, unrealistic assumptions. Well, we'll look at scientific foreknowledge for just a minute. And when you think about it, from the earliest times, man has been interested in the question of his origin, hasn't he? Even today, we see articles on man's questioning this. The matter of man's origin is, in essence, the matter of God's existence. The further one carries the matter of origins, the closer one comes to the matter of the existence of God, if they truly look into it. And far too many people have come to believe that the Genesis account of origins and modern science are somehow opposed to each other. Though true science and true religion are never opposed to each other, the false theories of some scientists and the false ideas of some religionists often are, and it is here that the conflict has been both fueled and fanned. Because science has made such great strides in the areas of both knowledge and technology that many have come to believe if science does not first prove something true, judgment must be suspended, and anything with which the scientific method cannot deal must be discarded, ignored, or belittled. So what is science then? Well, first off, I might say that science deals only with those things that can be observed or measured by using the five senses. Science is therefore an attempt to gather and explain the facts about the universe in which we live. And since science is concerned with a given physical system already in operation, we must ask, what is the origin of this system? Because science is powerless to explain ultimate origins. It may define methods, it may define qualities, it may define limits. But origins, science cannot determine. It provides many answers, but certainly not all answers. And efforts to remove God from science only damages science. Science is really just man's attempt to understand God's thoughts after him. It is merely man's way to one of God's first commands. And that is found in Genesis, the first chapter, verse 28. Fill the earth and subdue it. God told all living creatures, told man to go out and fill the earth and subdue it. So science is man's attempt to subdue the earth. And as great as science is, it cannot explain everything naturally. In fact, such efforts are in fact doomed to fail. So how does science work then? Well, through the ages, various scientists and philosophers have used science to attack religion, and wrongly so, obviously. Some have denied the possibility of miracles, yet graciously allowed the existence of God. Still others have been completely naturalistic and have ruled out God altogether. What is to be the response of religious people to the attacks made upon religion by those using science as their weapon? Here's something that Dr. Gordon H. Clark says. He says the theologians who reply to these attacks are under a disadvantage. When a scientist or philosopher argues against religion, he does not need to know much about religion. But more than that, Christians believe God to be an incorporeal spirit. But the theologian is called upon to discuss space, time, motion, energy, electrodynamics, the solar system, quantum theory, relativity, and other assorted items. There is something else the theologian must know, and something more important. In addition to a selection of particular pieces of information, such as the details just mentioned, the theologian must have an overall view of science as a whole. He must have a philosophy of science, that is, he must know what science is. Obviously, he cannot compare, contrast, or relate religion and science unless he knows them both. The scientific method is said to be the best indeed the only method for solving any problem, so that in every debate it is science, not theology, that has the last word. Since every curious and intelligent person naturally wishes to understand his own times, he must be prepared to give science sustained attention. This was published in the Philosophy of Science and Belief in God in 1964. So let us give science some sustained attention then. The fact is that science may be divided into various categories. For example, formal sciences, which is math and logic. And then we have physical sciences, which is physics, biology, and psychology, and so on. Then we have the social sciences. This, of course, is sociology, political science, and so on. The idea is science is built upon several assumptions. And scientists assume certain things which seem to require no proof and which are recognized through common sense. And when you look at the 5 basic assumptions of science, they are, in fact, first, nature is understandable. There is a real world. Secondly, all nature is subject to the same laws, uniformity. And thirdly, measurable causes underlie observable effects. And fourth, the simplest explanation is probably the correct one, principle of parsimony, also known as Occam's razor. And fifth and last, the unfamiliar is explainable in terms of the familiar through analogy. So with these statements, assumptions stated, the scientist is now ready to make use of science. And it has long been recognized that science attempts to accomplish its objectives by pursuing the procedure called the scientific method. So in conclusion then, science then, as great as it is, does not provide all the answers. There can be no real conflict between natural science and true religion because their spheres are entirely distinct and separate. And conflicts between these two are always the result of misinterpretation and misrepresentation of one or the other or both. And history abounds with illustrations of all these forms of confusing contradictions. In fact, true science and true religion are not in conflict. They are, in fact, completely harmonious. Science is that looking glass given to man by God for the purpose of investigating and having dominion over his creation. And so with that said, let's look at some of the scriptures and see what God has to say. And when we look at the field of astronomy, the first thing we're going to see here is that, and I put that wrong there. Here we go. Isaiah, the 40th chapter, verse 22. Now I'll put it up there. It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. So this circle of the earth, for a long time, mankind thought the earth was flat, didn't they? You look at some of the earlier scientists and those people who, the early explorers and everything, they'd set out on the ocean and everything. They couldn't understand why the ship disappeared after a little while. They thought it fell off the side. But in fact, God said way back in Isaiah, the 40th chapter, verse 22, that the earth is a circle, that it's round. Circle literally means something with roundness or a sphere. And this is significant because God had said this years before man ever recognized it. Therefore, the evolutionists could not have understood this until he read the Bible, if he read the Bible. But science, the only way they begin to understand it is they begin to see what God had to say about the subject. You look at Psalms, the 19th chapter, verses 5 and 6. The psalmist says, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber and rejoices like a strong man to run its race. Its rising is from one end of heaven and its circuit to the other end, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. Again, talking about the field of astronomy. What do you think we're talking about here? What was the psalmist talking about? Huh? Who said? The sun? Okay. All right. Scoffers thought this taught false concept of geocentricity, the sun revolving around the earth. That was their attitude. But they discovered the sun was the center of the universe and stationary with the earth revolving around the sun. God said this a long time ago. The psalmist made it plain. Only recently has it been discovered that the sun is in an orbit of its own. And it takes 220,000 years to complete one orbit, for the sun to complete one orbit. God's perfect design. Well, you look at these scriptures. Job 38, verse 19. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And darkness, where is its place? Sir Isaac Newton suggested that light is composed of small particles that travel in a straight line. Does it? Does light travel in a straight line?
I don't think anything travels in a straight line.
Well, Job 38, verse 24 says, by what way is light diffused, or the east wind scattered over the earth? And the idea is, and when we were in school, we all took a prism, and we saw the colors of the rainbow, didn't we? And when rain comes, and after the rain and everything, what do we see? We see this beautiful rainbow. The idea is that when a narrow beam of sunlight passes at a slant into a triangular transparent prism, the sunlight is broken into a band of 7 colored lights called a spectrum. And so light does travel in a straight line until it hits this triangular transparent prism, if you will. And when it is diffused, and then it brings out all the beautiful colors. And so we see the beautiful colors of the rainbow. Sometimes looking at out your window, depending on the slant and everything, when the sun hits it just right, you can see those colors, can't you? The spectrum is there. God knew this. He told us this in Job. And it's taken scientists a long time to understand this. So we look at Ecclesiastes, the 1st chapter, verse 7. And this is the field of oceanography, okay? Ecclesiastes 1, verse 7 says, all the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. The question is, where does all the water go? There's 6,052,500 gallons of water per second flowing into the Gulf. Where does it go? The Gulf never overflows. It evaporates. It evaporates, it goes up into the sky, forms precipitation over onto the land, and we continue to have this circle, don't we, of water flowing. And this is what waters our vegetation, our crops. And this is what provides water for us to drink. Because the water in the Gulf, the water in the ocean has salt content, but when it evaporates and it comes over here, it's fresh water, isn't it? And as the water begins to run back into the Gulf, it takes minerals with it, and it continues to replenish the ocean with the salt content. God has designed this perfect setup. So we look at Ecclesiastes 11th chapter and verse 3. And the Ecclesiastes writer said, if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall lie. You and I would understand that. And if the non-believer would just look at the scriptures, they would see that God put this in there many, many years ago. Amos the 9th chapter, verse 6 says, he who builds his layers in the sky and has founded his strata in the earth, who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the face of the earth, the Lord is his name. 2,000 years before work of those who demonstrated, God had already done it and had already said it was going to be done and that it was done. Any comments? Any questions? Well, let's look at another one here in oceanography. In Job 38th chapter, verse 16. Have you entered the springs of the sea, or have you walked in search of the depths? You ever thought about that scripture? The Hebrew word for recesses or trenches refers to that which is hidden and known only by investigation. What were these recesses of the deep? The Hebrew word for deep is the word for seas or oceans. Man in previous centuries considered the seashore as nothing but a shallow, sandy extension from one continent to another. But then in 1873, there was a team of British scientists working in the Pacific Ocean, and they found a recess 5.5 miles deep. And then later there was another team of researchers that discovered another trench, 5,800 feet deep, and it was over 6 miles down. Trenches now are known to be found in all three major oceans, but the Pacific Ocean is unique in that it has a semi-continuous peripheral belt of trenches and deep sea troughs. And many ships today use those rivers underneath the ocean, if you will, as paths to guide them. And you look at our sea creatures and everything, they will use them too. They will migrate from one body of water to another, or from cold to warm, whichever the case may be, based on these currents that's down in the deeps. Any thoughts? Gene, you're a navigator on the seas. Yes, Gene?
Yeah, the one, the trench that they've identified at 7 miles deep, they call the Marianas Trench. That's in the southwest part of the Pacific. And that's the one they have found as the deepest, 35,300 feet.
Yeah. And that's where now?
Marianas Trench, off the Marianas Islands in southwest Pacific.
Marianas Trench off the Marianas Islands. Okay? And that one, like Gene says, is the one that's 35,800 feet deep, or 6 miles deep. So, God knew this. God told us this in the Scriptures. If we just read the Scriptures, we can fully understand it. And if we can take someone who is a non-believer and ask them, read the Scripture to them and ask them what this means. But the key is that we have to know what it means as well. We have to know some science. We have to be able to explain it. And we can do that. Well, so continuing on with the field of oceanography, Genesis, the 6th chapter, verse 15. God said, "And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. There is a book about this thick. I have it. In fact, I just recently bought it, and I'm reading it now. I wished I'd have had it before I put this material together. It's called The Genesis Flood. Very good book. Ron's read it, and it's got some very detailed information in there. But there's some things in there that maybe we haven't thought about. When you think about what Genesis said here, this ark is a ratio of 30 to 5 to 3 length to breadth to height. Until approximately 1858, the ark was the largest seagoing vessel of which we have any written record. Using the most conservative estimate available for a cubic, approximately 17.5 to 18 inches, the ark would have been roughly 450 feet long, which was about 1.5 football fields. It would have contained approximately 1.5 million cubic feet of space. In 1844, when Isambard Brunel built his giant ship, the Great Britain, he constructed it to almost exact dimensions of the ark, 35 and 3. As it turns out, these dimensions are the perfect ratio for a huge boat built for seaworthiness and not for speed. The ark was built to float. How many stories did the ark have?
3.
3 stories. How many animals was put on the ark? Huh? All of them? Not all of them. 2 of the unclean.
And 7 pair of clean.
7 of the clean. There's a debate as to whether it's 7 pair of the clean or whether it's just 7 of the clean. But it does, and when you look at Genesis, it says 7s of the clean. So the idea is that God wanted the clean animals. Now the question is, was it dinosaurs put on the ark? Huh? They must have been. Nothing says in the Scriptures that everything that was put on the ark, every living creature put on the ark, had to be full grown. The dinosaurs could have been put on the ark in just babies. There would have been more than enough room for every living creature that God wanted spared to be put on that ark. The fishes didn't have to be put on the ark. The fowls didn't have to be put on the ark. They could fly around and they could set up on top of the ark, up on the roof of it and on the edge of the ark. They didn't have to have cages inside for the fowl. But how many souls was in that ark? How many? 8 souls. Noah and his sons preached all the years they built that ark. And if God could destroy a whole nation, a whole world of people, and what animals that was not put on that ark, and spare only 8 souls, because it was only 8 souls that believed, then God will spare only those souls that will believe and be faithful today. And if that's only 8 souls, that's all that's going to be spared. You look at Sodom and Gomorrah. The question was, if we could just find 10 righteous souls, would you spare it? God said, I'll spare it. He is a loving, faithful God. But the fact is, they couldn't find 10 righteous souls in Sodom and Gomorrah. So Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. The earth was destroyed. How high was the water above the highest mountain? Anybody remember? Well, you can turn over in your Bibles and you can look at it in the Bible if you want to.
It wasn't that high, but it was high enough. It was like 40 to 100. Keep it so.
You have to keep in mind the ark being 3 stories high and as big as it was, there was part of that ark underwater, wasn't it? The water had to be high enough to where the ark would float over the highest mountain. And the evidence is there, because when they go to the highest mountain peaks, they can find evidence of sea life in those mountains. 15 cubits high. Remember, 18 inches is a cubit. So how high? Huh?
It's about 40 feet, isn't it?
Yeah, 22 and a half feet. Now, I say that because if I remember right in this book on the Genesis flood, and Ron, you might correct me, but I think that they said in this book that based on the evidence and everything, the ark, the ship was actually 15 feet into the water. So with 22 and a half feet, that left 7.5 feet for them to go over the highest peak. God's design. Amazing, isn't it? Amazing. Well, let's look at the field of physics. We're getting further along in these than I thought we would. Genesis, the 2nd chapter, verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. Genesis 2:2, and on the 7th day God ended His work which He had done, and He rested on the 7th day from all His work which He had done. So, when we look at that, Moses stated that the creation was finished once and for all. Therefore, evolutionists, for them to say that creation continues is a contradiction to what the Scriptures say. Because that is exactly the first law of thermodynamics. This law, often referred to as the law of conservation of energy and matter, states that neither matter nor energy can be created nor destroyed. Why? Because God finished it. That's what Moses said. And we ought to be able to show the non-believer what the Scriptures say. And therefore, if we can show them enough information and get them to accept it and acknowledge it. One of the first things, and we said this in the very first class, but just as a reminder, in case there might be someone here that has forgotten and would want to argue with me as to how long the 6 days of creation took. It did not take thousands of years each day, because just because a day to God is like 1,000 years, when God said the evening and the morning was the first day and the evening and the morning was the second day and so forth, that tells us that it was a day. But if you ever want to prove it, and I'm going to remind you again, go to Exodus the 20th chapter with me. I'll get turned over there. Exodus 20th chapter. And let's begin at verse 8. God said, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Verse 9 says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Now who's he talking to here? Children of Israel. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. Now, God told the Israelites, 6 days you shall work. Did they work for 1,000 years in each day? The answer is very simple, because if you go to verse 10, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. If you can't take that verse, those verses, and show someone that Genesis chapter 1 was talking about 6 days of creation and it was not thousands of years, then you need to study some more. It's as simple as that, because it's very plain here that the Israelites certainly did not labor 1,000 years for each day. Yes, Dan?
Nor did they fail to labor 1,000 years on the seventh day.
That's very true.
How long could you exist without labor?
Exactly right. How long can you exist? Now, here's something interesting. What was created on the first day? Huh?
Light.
Light. Until light was created, darkness was there. God didn't create darkness. He created light. And light of the world. Creation began on the first day. What else took place on the first day? Huh?
The Spirit of the Lord moved upon.
The Spirit of the Lord moved upon the earth. What else took place in the first day?
Land appeared.
Land appeared on the first day. Okay? Let's move past Genesis. What else occurred on the first day? Let's move past Genesis. Let's move to the New Testament. What else occurred on the first day? Huh? Church was established on the first day. Jesus arose on the first day, didn't he? All of this was on the first day. There was a reason God did things. Do what?
On a first day, not the first day.
Okay. On a first day then. When I said the, I didn't mean specific.
Well, we're being specific.
You are. I'm glad. Keep getting specific here on me.
I was looking just trying to see if they understood.
Okay. Good job. All right, let's continue with the field of physics then. Nehemiah, the 9th chapter, verse 6. You alone are the Lord. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and everything on it, the seas and all that is in them, and you preserve them all. The host of heaven worships you. The idea, which is what I just said a moment ago, matter cannot be destroyed. It may change form, but the total amount of energy in the universe remains the same. And the reason being is because God preserves it all, and man cannot destroy it. Okay? All right, so then we look at Psalm 102, verse 26. They will perish, but you will endure. Yes, they will all grow old like a garment. Like a cloak, you will change them, and they will be changed. And Hebrews 1:11 says, they will perish, but you remain, and they will all grow old like a garment. Hebrews is just merely repeating the psalmist here. This, of course, is exactly what the second law of thermodynamics states. God said this in the Bible, and evolutionists have a hard time explaining all of this. So, what is that law? Well, the law states that as time progresses, entropy increases. Entropy is a scientific word which simply means that things become more disorderly, more random, more unstructured. In other words, a flower blooms, a flower fades, and a flower dies. A child grows into adolescence, adulthood, senility, and dies. The house we build today in 250 years will be a heap of junk. The car we buy today, given 30 or 40 years, will rust and fall apart, except for Gene's car. Everything is running down. Everything is wearing out. Energy is becoming less available for work. Eventually, then, theoretically speaking, the universe, left to itself, will experience a heat death when no more energy is available for use. We did not discover these things until fairly recently, yet the Bible writers portrayed them accurately thousands of years ago. And what was the source of this knowledge? God. All right, so, the field of medicine.
Hey, Dale.
Yes?
I like this quote that I heard. It said, we may hold the thought, but God holds the time.
That's right. We may hold the clock, but God holds the time. That's exactly right. Yeah, I hate to, I have to say this based on what you just said, Kathy. That's exactly the attitude that the Taliban has in Afghanistan. When we leave, because they've said, we've got all the time in the world, but you had the clock. And when we leave, rest assured, things will change. But your point is well taken, Kathy, and I appreciate you bringing that out. All right, so we'll just look at a couple here in the field of medicine because these are some interesting things as well. Leviticus 17, verses 11 through 14. For it is the life of all flesh, its blood sustains its life. We didn't know that in George Washington's day how he died. Anybody know how he died? They bled him to death. Back many, many years ago, that's what physicians thought, is that when you had an infection and everything, that you needed to get some of your blood removed from your body. And so they would perform a procedure called bloodletting. They might cut on the ear, they might cut on the arm or someplace like that to remove some blood. If you have high blood pressure and you want to reduce your blood pressure, that's an easy way to do it. But I wouldn't recommend it. Okay? But the point is, George Washington knew that he was dying when they bled him. The story goes, and I looked it up on the internet to see how it goes, but supposedly he crossed his arms across his chest and died peacefully because he knew he was dying. And all of this bloodletting, as I remember, was because he actually had pneumonia. But he didn't die from the pneumonia. He died from removing blood from his body. All right, well, our time is up there, so we will continue with the field of medicine next week.